Good morning, everyone. The Senate will come out of recess. I call the Senate to order. Without objection, all personal privileges or unanimous consent or other remarks shall be entered into the permanent journal of the Senate per Rule 216 and 217. And now I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the late session.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion to adjourn passes. We are now in the early session, and the Senate will please be attentive to our chaplain, the Reverend John Hopkins. Good morning, sir.
Let us pray. We meet this morning in the midst of so much turmoil. We are mindful today of all the people in Israel who continue to mourn those who were brutally killed by Hamas. We are mindful today of all the people in Gaza who continue to suffer from the war. We're mindful today of all the people in Ukraine who continue to fight for their homeland. We are mindful of the 16 families that are mourning the loss of loved ones in another senseless mass shooting in Maine. We are mindful today that peace is so far from a reality. But we ask you to bring peace to our hearts. We ask that you bring peace to the New Hampshire State Senate. Remember today our colleague, Senator Robert Clegg. Remember that he was well known for keeping and following through on his promises. He was a man true to his word. He did everything in life with honor and integrity. Help the New Hampshire State Senate to honor him by living up to his example, that they might be an example of how to conduct ourselves among the many disagreements we have, that they might show all the citizens of New Hampshire how to compromise when necessary and how to follow the rule of law, how to conserve all the traditions of democracy that we hold so dear, and how to make progress towards a more just and peaceable world. Thank you for their service to all the citizens of New Hampshire. May their work here be a reflection of their dedication to doing what is good, honorable, and just. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would now like to invite Senator Waters and Senator Carson to light a candle in honor of our former colleagues, Senator Robert Clegg and Senator Frank Torr.
I made a promise I wouldn't burn the building down.
Thank you, and if you could all join me in a moment of silence for Senator Clegg and Senator Torr. Thank you. Senator Birdsall, could you please lead us in the pledge? Senator Rosenwald is excused. Introduction of guests, Senator Pearl.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. We are all lucky today, and especially me, to have my beautiful wife here, Heather, in attendance. And I want to thank her for her patience and allowing me to do this job, because as you all know, without their patience of our family and friends, we would not be here. So thank you and welcome.
Further introduction of guests, Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to welcome a former colleague of ours, Ms. Ava Hawks, who's here today with us in the gallery. So please join me in welcoming her back.
Further introductions? Okay, seeing none. I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to amend Senate Rule 7-1 with the amendment provided here today.
Is there any discussion? These are the deadlines for sign-off on bills and the schedule for 2024. Seeing no discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The deadlines are adopted by the necessary 2/3. I would say this, there are 314 bills that we've filed. This rule that we just adopted extends the sign-off for prime sponsors by 2 weeks and co-sponsors by 1 week, but all of us will have a responsibility to make sure we sign off on things as expeditiously as possible, because the folks downstairs in OLS are really, we've asked them to do a lot, so we need to help them, okay? Thank you. Governor's veto messages. We'll start there. Without objection, the clerk shall read the title of the veto message only, and the clerk is instructed to enter all House messages into the Senate Journal. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 42, relative to overpayment of unemployment compensation.
Is there any discussion? Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I urge my colleagues to maintain the Senate position on Senate Bill 42. As a quick reminder, this bill merely prohibited the state from charging and collecting interest in the settlement of overpaid state unemployment compensation where fraud was not an issue. This bill had bipartisan and bicameral support and sponsorship. I'm grateful for my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for their support and work on this bill. It was, in fact, without controversy in the Senate, where the New Hampshire Employment Security said pretty plainly, this is an issue, it's a policy issue that the legislature should decide. So just a quick clarification too, the state is already prohibited from collecting interest on overpaid federal compensation, regardless of where fraud is found. But this bill, we worked on it for several years. It was a more targeted approach of eliminating this overly punitive interest only where fraud was not an issue. I don't have to tell this group that folks were experiencing job loss in a very different and unique way. And it was most severely seen in our service industries, our healthcare sectors, of course, where women predominantly make up that sector. It included new folks to unemployment like gig workers, and of course, those who were staying home to care for dependent family members, and of course, those who lost access to childcare. I wanted to put a few actual stories to this policy that does impact folks. The first individual is a dental hygienist in their 60s who had felt unsafe to return to work when their office opened in May 2020. This was because, for a number of reasons, the CDC recommendations weren't in place, and the individuals had asthma, so didn't feel comfortable going back to work. So this individual applied for, received state and federal unemployment benefits, but was later deemed to have overpaid over $16,000 in benefits. The decision at Employment Security found them at fault in causing the overpayment and said restitution was required. Of course, that's when the interest starts to accrue soon after that. Unable, of course, to pay this overpayment, they contacted New Hampshire Legal Assistance for help. NHLA requested and reviewed their record and agreed with the client that they did not make any material misrepresentations to the department to cause the overpayment. NHLA was able to help this individual through a complex legal process where the finding of fault was reversed and a waiver was granted addressing the overpayment. But despite the incredible work that New Hampshire Legal Assistance does, not every Granite Stater is able to access legal representation when they get a $16,000 bill from the state. What happens to them? In another case, a 62-year-old with a serious medical issue was found at fault for an overpayment of close to $30,000. Can you imagine being sent a bill for $30,000 and knowing that interest accrual was also imminent? In this case, New Hampshire Employment Security was confused, thought this individual was out of work during the entire pandemic due to having cancer, but in fact, the cancer occurred only after the individual had returned to work and had to reduce their hours. Fortunately, again, New Hampshire Legal Assistance was there to help them, but they simply cannot represent every single person in this predicament. I know you, my colleagues, I have received calls in the past several years of people in similar situations. The point I want to make is that these are real people. These are Granite Staters that are doing their very best to support their families and working through a difficult time in their life in a system that is often forces them to, be rushed. Folks who lost their jobs, need temporary support. It's not forever, but they need it for very important reasons: to pay their rent, to pay childcare, to buy food. I think to imply that these folks all purposely manipulated the system is deeply troubling and deeply unfair. Often, by the time an overpayment is discovered, that money's already spent. It's already spent on rent, food, childcare. I think saddling families with interest when they have made an accidental mistake, that's what we're talking here, an accidental mistake, is not how we should be treating our fellow citizens when they are down. New Hampshire doesn't charge interest on any other benefit, so why are we singling out this benefit? We are only one of a handful of states that charges this overly punitive interest. We have a chance to fix that today. Again, I truly appreciate my colleagues' support of this bill when we first voted on it, and I humbly request your continued support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. Senator Birdsall, I think you have some very special guests.
Yes, I'd like everybody to stand and welcome students from my biggest town of Derry, from East Derry Memorial Elementary. Welcome.
Thank you, folks. Senator Gray to speak.
Unlike my colleague, I would request that this body sustain the governor's veto. Per Senate Bill 42, the state will not charge interest on collection of overpayments of unemployment compensation unless the person knowingly or willingly made a false statement in their application for benefits. When this bill originally came to the Senate, we passed the bill on a voice vote. While this bill has merit, the department is concerned that if the veto is overridden, the bill will allow ineligible beneficiaries to essentially receive interest-free loans at the cost of New Hampshire employers, remove any incentive to pay back the overpayment due to the elimination of the interest, make it extremely difficult for the state to recoup the $6 million in overpayments between 2017 and 2022, be redundant due to the existing appeals process that prevents interest from occurring. With this in mind, the Senate should sustain the governor's veto and come back with a new solution that addresses the overpayment and does not come at the cost of the New Hampshire employers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. Further discussion. Senator Susi.
Mr. President, I too rise to ask this body to override this veto. This issue, as my colleague from District 6 just mentioned, is something that passed on a voice vote. It's something that we all recognized was the right thing to do, an appropriate thing to do. This legislation had bipartisan support from the beginning to the end. And when I think back to just after the pandemic, when things, not that the pandemic is completely over, but when things started to come back to life, I started receiving calls, much like many of you did. Most of the calls I received were from women There were people working in the food service industry. And I reached out to the department, they investigated, and in just about every case, there was an error made. There was an error made by the individual. But I think what's most important is the language of the bill says that the commissioner shall not charge on overpayments unless the person willfully made a false statement or representation or knowingly failed. In just about every case, these people genuinely believed, as they were filling out the form, they were doing the right thing. They were honest. They believed in every instance there was nothing intentional on their behalf. And yet, when they called and expressed their concern and described their problem, many of them were barely, particularly in food service, back to making full wages again. They literally were struggling to keep their lives going and were then receiving this bill of tens of thousands of dollars. And for many of them, it was just catastrophic, the thought that they would have to come up with this money. So I don't believe that 1% interest is really the collection tool that everybody believes it is. I don't believe that this is asking the government to hand out loans. I think this is recognition of the fact that we're in a time where people really were struggling. Some people continue to struggle economically, and this is a reasonable, modest step to ensure that those who make an innocent mistake, that those who overlook something without any intention to defraud are not charged this usury, and in fact, that we focus in on those who do commit fraud and allow the department to do their work and to use the tools that are available to them. So I would ask all of you to really think back to why you supported this in the first place, because we all did, because it was the right thing to do. And for those reasons, Mr. President, I would ask all of you to override the veto today.
Thank you, Senator Susi. Senator Whitley to speak a second time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't want to belabor the point, but I did just want to address one issue that my colleague raised. What we're talking about here is just getting rid of the interest. We're not talking about getting rid of the overpayment. And so what I heard my colleague say is that charging interest is the only tool we have to get this money back. That is unfortunately, that's just not the case. The reality is, as an employment security has many other tools in addition to charging interest to recover the overpayment. The department can intercept a person's federal tax refund. Staff can pursue a lien against the person's house or try to garnish that person's wages. And the state can deduct the amount owed from future benefit payments until the debt is repaid. There are plenty of other tools. Yet the tool we're talking about here is the very overly punitive charging of interest that will accrue. It's just not necessary, and I think it's cruel at a time where we're coming out of building our economy again, and I urge you to support the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. Is there further discussion? Okay, are you ready for the vote? So just so everybody is clear, if you support an override, you would say yes. If you support sustaining, you would say no. Okay, you ready for the question? A roll call is required. The clerk will please call the roll.
Senator Gendrew.
No.
Senator Lang.
No.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Prentice.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
No.
Senator Innes.
No.
Senator Ward.
Nope.
Senator Rishardi.
No.
Senator Fenton.
Yes.
Senator Stanley.
Yes.
Senator Avard.
No.
Senator Rosenwald is excused. Senator Carson.
No.
Senator Whitley.
Yes.
Senator Murphy.
No.
Senator Pearl.
No.
Senator Susi.
Yes.
Senator Birdsell.
No.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Abbas.
No.
Senator Gannon.
No.
Senator Altschiller.
Yes.
Senator Bradley.
No. No, noes have it. The governor's veto on Senate Bill 42 is sustained, lacking the necessary two-thirds. We'll move to Senate Bill 51, and the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 51, creating a commission to study charitable gaming and historical horse races, and relative to the moratorium on licensed historical horse racing facilities.
The question is, notwithstanding the governor's veto, shall Senate Bill 51 become law? Discussion. Senator Lang.
Thank you, colleagues. I'd ask you to support the governor's veto on my bill and a bill that came through my committee. As you know, we got a significant portion of this bill in the budget. So I think this bill, we should sustain the governor's veto. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? The clerk shall call the roll.
Senator Gendreau. No. Senator Lang.
No.
Senator Waters.
No.
Senator Prentice.
No.
Senator Gray.
No.
Senator Innes.
No.
Senator Ward.
No.
Senator Rishardi.
No.
Senator Fenton.
No.
Senator Chanley.
Yes.
Senator Avard.
No.
Senator Rosenwald is excused. Senator Carson.
No.
Senator Whitley.
No.
Senator Murphy.
No.
Senator Pearl.
No.
Senator Susi.
No.
Senator Birdsell.
No.
Senator D'Alessandro.
No.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
No.
Senator Abbas.
No.
Senator Gannon.
No.
Senator Altschiller.
No.
Senator Bradley.
No. The noes have it. Was that a yes? The noes have it. The governor's veto on Senate Bill 51 is sustained, lacking the necessary two-thirds vote. We'll now move to Senate Bill 79, and the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 79, an act relative to the participation of customer generators in net energy metering.
Is there discussion? Senator Lang.
Mr. President, again, this is a bill where I was the prime sponsor. Due an unforced error by the Senate, we amended the bill that struck a critical language in the net metering statute that makes the entire net metering statute unworkable. And the House didn't catch it either. We passed it, we sent it to the governor. The governor's office did catch it. And so I'd ask you to support the governor's veto. Thank you.
Further discussion. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to support the position of the prime sponsor of the bill. It's too bad. This is a great bill. I hope we can bring something forward that doesn't have the glitch in it, because Senator Lang really took great leadership on this and addressing something that'll help the customer generators of New Hampshire. Thank you, Mr. President.
You had 314 opportunities. Is there any further discussion? Are you ready for the question? The clerk shall please call the roll.
Senator Gendreau.
No.
Senator Lang.
No.
Senator Waters.
No.
Senator Prentice.
No.
Senator Gray.
No.
Senator Innes.
No.
Senator Ward.
Nope.
Senator Rishardi.
No.
Senator Fenton.
No.
Senator Chanley.
No.
Senator Avard.
No.
Senator Rosenwald is excused. Senator Carson.
No.
Senator Whitley.
No.
Senator Murphy.
No.
Senator Pearl.
No.
Senator Susi.
No.
Senator Birdsell.
No.
Senator D'Alessandro.
No.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
No.
Senator Abbas.
No.
Senator Gannon.
No.
Senator Altschiller.
No.
Senator Bradley.
No.
20.
The noes have it. The governor's veto on Senate Bill 79 is sustained, lacking the necessary two-thirds. We'll now move to Senate Bill 193, and the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 193, relative to the obligation of collective bargaining units to negotiate in good faith.
The question is, notwithstanding the governor's veto, shall Senate Bill 193 become law? Is there discussion? Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Senator Bradley, and it's nice to be back with my colleagues. I stand in support, I stand today and ask for your support in overriding the governor's veto of Senate Bill 193. Senate Bill 193 amends the collective bargaining good faith statute, which is 273A3, being highly technical here, which would insert a tool that would allow for either public party to make a request to enter into negotiations, and that request would either need to start the timeline within 10 days or request an extension. It doesn't force them to the table in 10 days unless they agree that they want to do that. It gives a tool for this to happen. And again, it allows for the parties to agree on an extension. I am just going to take a short trip down memory lane as a city councilor. And if you went back and you probably looked at the records in my earlier years in 2009, 10, and 11, when I was first on the council, one of the things that struck me is when we didn't make policy including enter into negotiations and work on the contracting process with our public collective bargaining units, what we saw is that we lacked predictability for our taxpayers. So as we kicked the can down the road, we saw costs go up in terms of wages. Okay. We saw costs go up in terms of benefits for our public employees. And then we would ask 5 or 6 years later the taxpayers to foot that big spike, if it was a big spike, but a spike in their tax bill. So it created this lack of predictability. You can find me on record talking about this at the local level, because I think we have an obligation not just to the great public workers that we serve and to our local governments, but we also, at the end of the day, the people who pay their tax bills, this actually impacts them. That's why I picked this up and decided to support it. So I wanted to share that with you. I have a list, 1, 2. Number 3 is this was a voice vote. We all agreed on March 16th, 24-0. And I'm not exactly sure what's changed between now and then. I understand the governor's position is that this is overreach or overly prescriptive. I don't know how government overprescribes in itself, especially again when we're trying to do the right thing for the taxpayers. But I will respect his position and ask you to respect mine and the work that was done to get this bill passed. Uphold the position that you took in March and override this veto. Again, it's great to be back, and I look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. Further discussion. Senator Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good faith. Senator from District 20 could probably tell me what it is in Latin, but I can't remember. Bona faith? What would faith be? It doesn't matter. Okay, we'll move on. Good faith is at the heart of collective bargaining. It's required by state law when municipalities and unions are negotiating their contracts. 193 would redefine good faith, a concept, to require one party within 10 days of receiving a written notice from the other party to meet the bargain. The bill was originally passed on voice vote. I don't know if it was 24-0. I can't remember hearing both sides, but the New Hampshire Municipal Association now opposes this bill, as does the governor. He and the majority here, I believe, are going to say that inserting the legislature into the details of collective bargaining agreements, stipulating very specific requirements that could be agreed on by the two sides on their own. Like us, our local officials are volunteers. It can be tough to schedule a meeting on short notice. Should the state dictate when they have to schedule contract negotiations, even around the holidays when some of us might be down in southern Florida or during budget season? I support good faith in New Hampshire collective bargaining. It's a concept. You can know it when you see it. I think we can come together in the next session in good faith and find a solution that doesn't impose specific deadlines on our local officials. Please join me in voting no on overriding the governor's veto on 193. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gannon. Senator Prentice to speak again.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank you, Senator Gannon, for your comments. I just want to remind the body that this sets into motion a requirement for 10 days. And if you can't meet in 10 days because you are in maybe in Florida or in, there's a reason that that body can't meet, then you can ask for an extension. So I just want to make that clear that it doesn't push you into that 10-day window unless you decide you want to get into this together. This is about creating predictability in the process, in a good faith process, and ultimately the bottom line and where this ends up is on the desks and in the checkbooks of our taxpayers that we serve here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? The clerk will please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Gendreau.
No.
Senator Lang.
No.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Prentice.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
No.
Senator Innes.
No.
Senator Ward.
Nope.
Senator Ricciardi.
No.
Senator Fenton.
Yes.
Senator Chanley.
Yes.
Senator Avard.
No.
Senator Rosenwald is excused. Senator Carson.
No.
Senator Whitley.
Yes.
Senator Murphy.
No.
Senator Pearl.
No.
Senator Susi.
Yes.
Senator Birdsell.
No.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Abbas.
No.
Senator Gannon.
No.
Senator Altschiller.
Yes.
Senator Bradley.
No. The noes have it, 9-14. The governor's veto on Senate Bill 193 is sustained, lacking the necessary two-thirds. We'll move to Senate Bill 256, and the Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 256, establishing a safety program for off-highway recreation vehicles.
Question is, notwithstanding the governor's veto, shall Senate Bill 256 become law? Is there discussion? Senator Prentice?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to point out or raise in this body again the facts that injury, unintentional injury, trauma, is the leading cause of death between the ages of 1 and 44 in the state of New Hampshire. I think it's 1 in 45 nationally. And though we've seen a change in the middle of that age group around overdoses, in particular related to opioids, it doesn't change the fact that this is what is disabling and what is causing the deaths of not only Granite Staters, but of the tourists that have been raised in the veto message that would come to New Hampshire looking for a safe experience. In my line of work, which involves injury prevention, we have this saying, every ounce of prevention is worth a lifetime of cure. This is an opportunity for us to take a position and say that the safety of the people that live here and work and come and visit here is of the utmost importance. I'm heartened to see that there's going to be an effort for all of these parties to continue to work together to maybe bring about something that maybe the governor would consider better. But we did support this, and I think we should override the veto, and we should put reducing death and disability related to unintentional injury on the front burner, not the back burner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ride in support of Senator Ward's bill, and we worked on safety for quite a long time with these programs, the OHRVs, and I think we should be proud as a state of what we've done with Ride the Wild and how much we have done to encourage that activity. But we do see every winter and other times of the year where there are fatalities, and I think that what the senator from District 8 came up with was actually something that would facilitate riders from New Hampshire and from other states to take this safety program. And I was a little disappointed in the governor's message, the assumption that this would be more restrictive or might discourage folks from coming in. In other words, I actually think the intent of the bill is to do the exact opposite, to provide an online and really quite reasonable way of people getting a safety course. So it is what it is. I think we need to do it, and if we couldn't mean, I hope we'll override this veto, but there's no question that we have to do something about the safety programs. And I think this was a good bill, and I'm going to support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? The clerk will please call the roll.
Senator Gendreau.
No.
Senator Lang.
No.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Prentice.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
No.
Senator Innes.
No.
Senator Ward.
Yes.
Senator Rishardi.
No.
Senator Fenton.
Yes.
Senator Chanley.
Yes.
Senator Avard.
No.
Senator Rosenwald is excused. Senator Carson.
No.
Senator Whitley.
Yes.
Senator Murphy.
No.
Senator Pearl.
No.
Senator Susi.
Yes.
Senator Birdsell.
No.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Abbas.
No.
Senator Gannon.
No.
Senator Altschiller.
Yes.
And Senator Bradley.
No. The noes have it, 10 to 13. The governor's veto on Senate Bill 256 is sustained, lacking the necessary 2/3 vote. So we're waiting on the House on their vetoes. I'm told that they've gone through 2, and they're on their final 2, which may create some debate. So what I would suggest is let's take a recess for 1 minute and let our very able clerk find out where we're at, and then I'm going to discuss with Senator Susi what we should do next, and Senator Carson. The Senate will come out of recess. Senator Susi moves that we go right back into recess. What I'd suggest is, we talked about 11:15. Let's do 11:30. There are 2 more bills in the House, and we're still awaiting the resolution in OLS. So the Senate will be in recess until 11:30. And we have some special guests, again, of Senator Birdsall. I recognize Senator Birdsall.
I'd like you all to stand and welcome East Derry Memorial Elementary School from Derry, my largest town. Welcome.
Senator Susi has moved for a 2-minute recess. We'll be in recess. Thank you. The Senate will come out of recess, please, and be attentive to the clerk.
We have everybody here. Rashadi. There's Pearl. There she is.
The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. House Bill 337, relative to directing the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification to provide the notice of public meetings and an opportunity for a comment from the public in creating a new attorney to position. That's it.
The question is, notwithstanding the governor's veto, shall House Bill 337 become law? Discussion. Senator Pearl.
Sorry, I thought Senator Carson was going first. Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I would ask you to join me in sustaining the governor's veto. There's, the ED&A committee did a lot of work on this, as well as the House ED&A committee did, and we thought we had a really good bill, and we do have a really good bill. But the governor identified a flaw that occurred related to some board meetings. Essentially, any unforeseen issues like postponements, excuse me, cancellations, quorums, any of those issues would require the committees to wait 14 days before they could meet again. Now, as you know, many of these boards are volunteer boards, and it's very difficult to get them together, especially with quorum issues. So this just puts another barrier in place that prevents them from meeting in a timely manner. And we've got a potential fix for this bill. If we sustain this veto, we have a path forward. I've talked with leadership on both the Senate and the House side, and we have an agreement, and with the governor's office, that we can make a change to language that we have that my colleague from, sorry, I have to look, District 14 has filed another bill that we could use, and we can fast-track a bill, fix the issues, and have a great piece of legislation that will go forward. Additionally, one of the concerns was the 91A standard for licensing boards would be different than other state bodies. We can do that as a legislature. We can make that choice. I just want, if we're going to do that, I want us to be careful, and I want us to make sure we have it right. And we've identified that there is a concern with the language that we passed. So I would ask that you all join me in sustaining the veto and let us fix it and get a better bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pearl. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise, quite frankly, a little reluctantly to ask the body to please override the governor's veto on House Bill 337. And I'd like to take you on a little trip to last summer. We, in ED&A at that time, had a bill that had been filed by a former colleague of ours dealing with OPLC, because there was a lot of tension between OPLC and the boards as to who had power over whom and who was responsible for doing what. So we took that bill, we turned it into a study committee, and we looked at if we're going to give OPLC the power over every board to take care of their administrative functions, how are we going to do that? We also looked at fees, because fees were all over the place. Many of them were violating the 125% rule. So what we ended up doing at the end of the day, and if you were to take a look at the committee report, it's 58 pages. So we put a heck of a lot of work in there. And we worked with every single entity who came to the table. And we listened. And we came up with 3 separate bills. The first one was House Bill 665, which really dealt with the administrative oversight that OPLC was going to assume. The next dealt with the fees. Both of those bills passed with no problem. Now we come to House Bill 337, brought into the House because we felt it was important that the House committee had the time to really look at this bill. And that's exactly what they did. They created their subcommittee, and they spent a lot of time fine-tuning this bill. In fact, OPLC came in and said, we're going to need another person to implement this legislation. So what happened? The policy committee agreed with them, gave them that person, came out of the committee 20-0, got sent over to finance. Finance agreed with them, came out of House Finance 25-0, came out of the House, I believe 380-something to nothing. No controversy until it got here, until it got to the Senate. And it was during that public hearing, and I know my colleagues, the good senator from District 24 and the good senator from District 21, were there. Okay. We're there, and I did something that I normally don't do. I got a little strident because it's like, wait a minute, you had every opportunity to fix this in the House. Why now, all of a sudden, are there problems? So we had a conversation with the Senate President, and that afternoon, the Senate President, the chair of Senate ED&A, myself, the chair of House ED&A, and the executive director of OPLC had a meeting in Senator Bradley's office. And we received a commitment that they were going to fix everything. They're going to take care of it all. And that's what we thought they did. We thought that this was all taken care of. It came out of this body on a voice vote. Nobody asked for a committee of conference. We were all in agreement. Nobody weighed in and said, wait a minute, there's still a problem here. We could have fixed it in a committee of conference. That did not happen. So I was really kind of surprised to see the governor veto this bill. So what is really at issue here? And who are we actually advocating for? We talk about transparency in government. Well, one of the things that we learned during that study committee we had, well, where were the voices of the licensees? We focus on the boards, but what about the licensees? They need those licenses in order to operate here in the state of New Hampshire. Their voices are important. They asked for a 14-day notification. They work. They could be a nurse doing shift work. They could be a carpenter who's working on site, away from home. They need that license. They need time to be able to look at everything that's going to be coming in front of the board. That's why they needed that extra person to redact sensitive information. It's also about informing the public as to what these boards are doing. And it gives the public adequate time to look at this. But now we're hearing, well, what happens if someone doesn't show up, a board doesn't meet, and they need to reschedule? What's the problem with giving another 14 days? You couldn't get them here then. 5 days from now, what difference is it going to be? A good board chair would have talked to the board members and said, okay, when can everybody be here? So for me, I struggle with that as a reason to veto this bill. We need this structure in place. We need it. I just recently, the audit was done on the dental examiner boards. You want to read something pretty bad? Take a read. Take a read of this. And it's not finding fault with just the board. It's finding fault with OPLC as well. And one of the good things that we did was we created the Oversight Commission over OPLC. And I luckily got elected to be chair of that. So it's like, where's the disconnect here? I would rather take this structure, because that's not the problem, and put that in place so they can have methods of communicating with each other, which they sorely need. I can't see waiting. We talk about fast tracking. But there's no guarantee. We can guarantee here, we can pretty well get it out the door, but we can't assume that the House is just gonna say, okay, we're gonna fast track that. Can I bring up last year's bill on the Sununu Center, Senate Bill 1? We got it out of here, but it stalled over there, and it just barely got signed in enough time to prevent that center from closing. My colleague, the chair of ED&A, is correct. I went ahead and I filed 337 again, knowing that we will have a vehicle. We will have a vehicle to address whatever concerns anybody has. And I can pretty well guarantee you, after seeing this letter, and I hope all of you have seen this, from OPLC, they have some other concerns as well. So is this going to be a one and done? No, it isn't. It's a work in progress. I do not want to create what happened to the OPLC a few years ago. Under Governor Hassan, she created an Efficiency and Transparency in Government Commission. I served on that one too. And we decided that we were going to take all the boards and they were going to be placed into 3 major boards. Was not an easy job. There was a wonderful person, Ms. Louise Levertu, who was the executive director. The job became so stressful for her, she decided to retire. And after that, OPLC kind of floundered around because I think they might have had 3 or 4 different executive directors. I don't want to see that happen again. I don't want to see the infighting. And it's already happening. I took meetings this summer with board members and licensees about conflict that was happening with OPLC. And I had to file legislation. I'm sure some of you will thank me very much while you're sitting here on a late winter's afternoon, because I've got so many bills that were filed. But we want to prevent that from happening. And I think having this structure in place that was thoroughly vetted by the House and the Senate is ready. The executive director told me in a conversation I had with her, they can implement this. So let's implement it, and then we'll fix it. And we'll take the time instead of fast tracking, because sometimes when you fast track, you make mistakes too. So if it's that serious, we'll have a bill, we'll have the public hearings, and we'll take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. So I think I've said enough. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Perkins-Cuoca.
Good morning, everybody. And I echo Senator Prentice. Nice to be back. I rise in support of overriding the veto on this piece of legislation, and I hope my colleagues will join me. I agree with Senator Carson. I think, on balance, the protections that we've passed in HB 337 are important. Just as an example, we heard that attending some board meetings, materials weren't available from OPLC, so this bill addresses that in 2 ways. One, it adds a position, and second, it provides some guardrails around how and when those materials can be provided, when items can be added to the agenda. So I hope you will join me in voting to override the veto on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perkins-Cuoca. Is there further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, are you ready for the question? The clerk shall please call the roll. Remember, if you are in favor of overriding, you will vote yes. If you are in favor of sustaining, you will vote no.
Senator Gendreau.
No.
Senator Lang.
No.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Prentice.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
No.
Senator Innes.
No.
Senator Ward.
No.
Senator Ricciardi.
No.
Senator Fenton.
Yes.
Senator Chanley.
Yes.
Senator Avard.
No.
Senator Rosenwald is excused. Senator Carson.
Yes.
Senator Whitley.
Yes.
Senator Murphy,
Yes.
Senator Pearl,
No.
Senator Susi,
Yes.
Senator Birdsell,
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro,
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka,
Yes.
Senator Abbas,
No.
Senator Gannon,
No.
Senator Altschiller,
Yes.
Senator Bradley.
No. The noes have it, 11 to 12. The governor's veto is sustained, lacking the necessary two-thirds vote. I recognize Senator Birdsell for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate suspend all rules necessary to permit consideration of SR 11.
Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted by the necessary two-thirds. I recognize Senator Birdsell again.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to introduce Senate Resolution 11.
Are you ready again for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted by the necessary two-thirds. And I recognize Senator Birdsell for a third time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move ought to pass on Senate Resolution 11, and I would like to speak to my motion.
Senator Birdsell to speak.
So I look back on the horrors that happened on October 7th that Hamas inflicted on the women, the children, the babies, and some of the Holocaust survivors in Israel. And I fear that history is starting to repeat itself. As most of you know, my father was one of the first troops to enter in and liberate the concentration camp of Dachau. He didn't talk much about it, but I know it affected him greatly. How do I know? When we were stationed in Germany in 1958, my mother went on a tour of Dachau. He refused to go in. So this month, I just returned from a trade mission in Poland. One of the trips we made was to a concentration camp, Stutthof. They had still the shoes of the children that were brought to Stutthof, encased in glass. The barracks are still there. The gas chamber is still there. And the incinerator is still there. And flags of all of the individuals who perished at Stutthof were flying there. When I was in high school, we did a half semester on the Holocaust. And when I look at the protests that are happening in Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., London, Paris, and Australia, when you hear chants like "Gas the Jews," "From the river to the sea," and "Glory to our martyrs," I fear our students are not getting afforded the same opportunity that we had in this education. We now have students, Jewish students, locked in a library in a New York college. Again, I fear history is again repeating itself, only this time it's a lot worse. It's going global. This resolution is a small way for New Hampshire to let Israel know that they have our support, and we will fight against history repeating itself. Mr. President, I hope all will support this resolution, and I ask for a roll call.
Thank you, Senator Birdsell. Senator Altschiller to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. On October 7th, the world witnessed a modern-day pogrom. 1,400 people were murdered, 30 of them American citizens. What were they doing? We know that hundreds were camping at a music festival, dancing, laughing, joyfully celebrating life with music, friends, family, until they weren't. We know that some were out walking in the early morning hours, enjoying the warm air, until they weren't. The warning sirens that began to blare moved people quickly into their safe rooms. This terrorist attack by Hamas reminds us of what it means to live next door to a government that doesn't believe in your right to exist. The daily threat that requires safe rooms, statewide sirens, walls, military presence in everyday life. Some of the people in the safe rooms were flushed out of their homes when their homes were set on fire by Hamas terrorists. If they didn't die inside their homes, when they made it outside, they were shot, they were stabbed, some were raped before their death, while terrorists gleefully recorded themselves, making videos of themselves committing atrocities and blasting it out to the world on social media. In an even more perverted act, a group of Hamas terrorists used a young woman's phone to record her torture. We all saw the video of the young woman splayed out in the back of a truck, paraded through the streets unconscious, naked. The mass murders weren't the only terrorist acts inflicted upon Israel that day. There were kidnappings of babies, children, young adults, grandparents. By now, we've seen the video of the woman who was released from the labyrinth of tunnels, and she is in traumatic shock. Her husband still ensconced in an underground infrastructure at the mercy of Hamas terrorists. The terrorist government of Hamas has a stated purpose of the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of the Jewish people. Former American diplomat to Israel, Jessica Kunst, said it best just 2 days ago. Israel has faced a Faustian bargain, being in the immediate proximity to groups whose stated raison d'etre is to wipe it off the face of the earth. This resolution supports our allies, the State of Israel. This resolution mirrors the resolution passed overwhelmingly by our House of Representatives in Washington. This resolution mirrors the strong actions and words of our president. This resolution condemns a coordinated terrorist attack that came with rockets, bulldozers, hang gliders, machine guns, knives, grenades by air, land, and sea. The people of Israel have a right to exist. They have a right to defend themselves. And I hope that we can all support this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Altshuler. Further discussion. Senator Susi.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I too stand in support of this resolution. I stand because I believe that the State of Israel was created as a safe place for the Jewish people after the Holocaust. I stand because the State of Israel is a democratic state. On October 7th, the end of a sacred holiday for the Jewish people, atrocities were committed that had been well planned, that were strategic. The attack was a sneak attack. None of the people had any warning. And the atrocities that were committed are just beyond the beyond. I don't think any of us could even imagine what happened to many of these people, although my colleague did describe some of the most heinous acts. This was the greatest loss of life Jewish people since the Holocaust. And I think that's something that should cause all of us to pause for a moment. And the Holocaust was one of the most extraordinary atrocities of the entire world. And yet, here, the beginnings of it are happening again. As I watched the news unfold, I couldn't help myself. I had to keep watching because I had to know what was happening. And I had to know because for me, a lot of it was very personal. I've been to Israel, and I started researching online some of the places that had been affected by the bombings. One of those places is a kibbutz that I had the privilege of visiting, Kibbutz Kfar Azar. This community was a place where people all had smiles on their faces, were so thrilled to welcome visitors. We shared lunch, communal lunch, that this community had on a daily basis. And yet at the same time, we talked to the people that were there and asked, how they didn't live with stresses and anxieties, given that they were so close to the border of Gaza, and given that there were bomb shelters. And some of those bomb shelters, I have pictures of them, were beautifully painted, and they were painted that way to attract the children so that they would know that was their safe place. That place is no more. That place of love and community and faith was completely wiped out. All of the people that lived in that amazing community, gone. And I was also reminded of another place I visited while I was in Israel, and that was the museum, Yad Vashem. And that's a particularly important place because Yad Vashem is about the memories of the Holocaust. We're now several generations out from people that lived through that experience. And the mission is to ensure that the records are kept and the memories are kept so that we know our history and we don't recommit these acts. There's a part of the museum that's dedicated to the lost lives of children. It's not brightly colored, it's a dark, dark space, and you have to hold the rail to walk through so you don't get lost. But there are individual points of light that you see as you walk through to represent the children that were lost during the Holocaust, and once again to remind us of all of the atrocities that occurred and that we have to stop, we have to prevent. Right after this occurred on October 11th, I joined with some of you in this room for a gathering of solidarity organized by New Hampshire's Jewish Federation. And many of our leaders spoke and were represented there. And it was a coming together for a lot of people to begin the grieving process. Not to begin, I think people were already grieving, but it was an opportunity for people to share and to know that we in New Hampshire are a community that supports our Jewish friends and neighbors. So, Mr. President, for all of those reasons, today I want to stand against anti-Semitism. I want this body to stand against anti-Semitism. I want all of us to stand with our most important ally in the Middle East, Israel. I want to stand for the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish and democratic state. And I want to stand for the right of Israel to defend itself against these atrocities under the international rules of war. For all of those reasons, Mr. President, I implore you, my colleagues, to please support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Susi. Is there further discussion? Senator Perkins-Coie.
Yes, thank you, Senator Bradley. I'd like to rise in support of this resolution, and I rise in support of our ally. I just have one little comment to make, which is on line 12. I do wish this could have read through the targeted use of military force, and I say that only because I join you in condemning the actions of Hamas, but I think we all know that there are children and civilians that are caught up in this conflict, and as a mom of now 3 little girls and a former Peace Corps volunteer, I wish everyone could be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perkins-Coie. Senator D'Alessandro.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I echo the sentiments of my colleagues with regard to this resolution. I've been to the Mideast on a number of occasions, and I've seen what's apparent there. And it's a devastating situation. The hatred that's manifested there is overwhelming, and you can feel it. You can feel it when you arrive. These people are all Semites. They should all be in concert with one another. The Palestinians, the Jews, should be living together in peace. We can't make that happen. We can identify the atrocity and we say it should never have happened. But indeed, the root of the problem will never be solved by a resolution. It'll be solved when people can join together and strive for one thing: peace for everyone. Thousands of Palestinians are being killed. I see the children on both sides. What good is that? What good is retribution? Peace is what we need. We've got to promote peace. We've got to eliminate hate. It exists in this country. We see an example of it in Maine. 20 people are dead. Why? Because one jerk doesn't like somebody else? He buys a weapon and kills people? 50, 60 people are in the hospital? That's in Maine. That's 20 miles from here. I'm talking to the Commissioner of Safety last night about it. This terrible situation is pervasive throughout the world. It's pervasive in our country. Over 500 people have been murdered in this country this year because we can't get along. I've been to the camps. I've seen the Palestinians who have no passports, who can't go anyplace, who can't do anything. So Hamas, the guerrilla aspect of it, takes hold. It feeds them the venom, feeds them the hate. We've got to do better. We've got to do better as a society. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. Senator Carson to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of Senate Resolution 11, and I ask my colleagues to support it as well. I think, like many of you, I watched in horror at some of the videos that came out. Some of them are just so bad that they won't show them. But for me, what was really symbolic was seeing the people that were at this music festival, and they had film of these soldiers that were parachuting in. I cannot imagine the horror those people endured. I don't think anybody can. But how much longer do we ask the Israeli people to turn the other cheek? They were doing nothing, minding their own business when they were attacked. And as our good friend from District, I got to look here, I think I'd know by now, 18 had said, it was just a music festival. And it was a long-planned attack. We need to stand with the state of Israel. And we need to stand with our Jewish friends. We need to remember this is the largest loss of Jewish lives since the Holocaust. Remember, the Holocaust never happened again. Never. Well, what do you call what happened on October 7th? Mr. President, it's sad that we have to do this. It really is. We shouldn't have to. But we need to make a strong statement here. not only for our Jewish friends in Israel, but for our Jewish citizens here in the United States as well. I don't know about you, Mr. President, but I watched yesterday on the news where a group of college students who were Jewish had barricaded themselves inside of a classroom because all the protesters were banging on the door trying to get to them. Where was their safe space? Where was the tolerance for them? It's awful what we're seeing happening, and it needs to stop. This might be a simple resolution, but we are taking a stand here, and it is an important stand. And I think it signals to the people of the state of New Hampshire, we stand arm in arm with our Jewish friends. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Whitley.
Mr. President, I also rise in support of the resolution and share what my colleague from District 21 mentioned about wanting it to be a little bit broader, in fact. I think there is without question that every senator in this room feels that what happened early in October to our Jewish friends in the state of Israel was one of the worst atrocities we will ever see in our lifetime. As a parent, and now as an elected official, I now understand at a deep level that two things can be true at the same time. Living with paradox is deeply human, but often deeply unsettling. I wholeheartedly condemn the horrific atrocities perpetuated by Hamas against our friends in Israel and stand with our Jewish friends in the United States who continue to process this horrific incident. I wholeheartedly support the state of Israel's right to exist and defend its people. And I also wholeheartedly support the right of all individuals to be free, safe, and treated with dignity, including Palestinians. The war in this region has resulted in devastating and horrific deaths of civilians, including children. It's unspeakable. I support this resolution, and I also ask our colleagues to think of all who are impacted by the devastating situation in the Middle East. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. Senator Chandley to speak.
For weeks, I've been devastated by the attacks committed by Hamas. For the past 24 hours, my thoughts have been consumed by this resolution, not because I don't support it, but because I do. While I would have liked language both more nuanced and more precise, I can make two statements unequivocally. I stand with Israel, its right to exist, to protect and defend its people, and I denounce the brutal, sickening acts of violence committed by Hamas. When reading this resolution, I was struck by the reference to defenseless women and children. Were not the men also innocent victims? I wish that had been the language that was used. Furthermore, it recognizes the right of Israel to use military force, and like my colleague, I could expand on that further. Should we not also have referenced diplomacy, intelligence, and humanitarian concerns? Should it not also speak to working toward an everlasting peace? I rise now because for me those omissions needed to be addressed, and I call for peace and justice. It is right and appropriate to offer this resolution. We should tread carefully as we do so because it is so very important. Throughout modern history, there have been barbarous attempts to eliminate others. We know this has happened. Folks have referenced the Holocaust, of course, the most hideous example. There have also been situations in Bosnia and in Rwanda. We must speak out now, and I do fear that we may find ourselves frequently in this position if we don't, in addition to passing a resolution, act now. We need to back our words with the kinds of things that my colleague from District 20 talked about, building relationships. I know that here in the New Hampshire Senate, we will not find the solution, but we can take certain steps. I join my colleagues in affirming New Hampshire's support for the State of Israel and the safety and security of its people, and I denounce terrorism, and I do now and always call for peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chandley. Is there any further discussion? A roll call was requested by Senator Birdsall. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Susi. The clerk will please call the roll.
Senator Gendrew.
Yes.
Senator Lang.
Yes.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Prentice.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Innes.
Yes.
Senator Ward.
Yes.
Senator Rishardi.
Yes.
Senator Fenton.
Yes.
Senator Chandley.
Yes.
Senator Avard.
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald is excused. Senator Carson.
Yes.
Senator Whitley.
Yes.
Senator Murphy.
Yes.
Senator Pearl.
Yes.
Senator Susi.
Yes.
Senator Birdsall.
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Abbas.
Yes.
Senator Gannon.
Yes.
Senator Altschiller.
Yes.
Senator Bradley.
Yes. The ayes have it, 23-0. The resolution is adopted. I now recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the early session, that the business of the late session be in order at the present time.
Please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The early session is adjourned. We are now in the late session. I know there are a number of personal privileges, but I want to start first by recognizing Senator Carson and Senator Waters to lead us in a moment of silence. Senator Carson, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for the people of Lewiston in light of the tragedy unfolding there.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would second that. In fact, I kind of looked at my phone, which I wasn't supposed to do. The shooter, as we know, was active in Lewiston, Maine, and that's where most of my mother's family live. And I received a text message from my daughter that they've heard from quite a few members of the family that they're okay. So, Mr. President, if we could have a moment of silence for the victims of this horrific shooting.
Thank you all. Senator Carson is recognized for personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is with a heavy heart that I'm going to try to discuss the recent passing of a colleague of ours, former Senate Majority Leader Robert Clegg, Jr. He died on August 31st of this year. It was a very, very sudden passing. And I think that so many people still can't believe that he's not here anymore. He was such a larger-than-life kind of a person, and he loved politics. And he spent so much time here, and the institutional knowledge he had, because he had served as the Senate Majority Leader from 2002 to 2006. He was the Speaker Pro Tem in the New Hampshire House in the 1990s. And he also was a senior partner of Legislative Solutions. He served 4 terms in the House, and he ran for Congress. He loved politics, and he loved debate and discussion. And if anybody had a question about anything, they would go see Bob, because Bob usually would have some information that he could give you. Or you'd say, hey, I heard about this. Oh, I got a file on that from 15 years ago. I'll bring it home. It's in my home. I'll bring it over for you so you can read what happened. Bob was truly a very, very unique individual. He came from a difficult background, and he worked really hard. He didn't go to college. He was quite proud of that, quite frankly. He was a self-made man. He had his own construction company, as well as the lobbying firm. I don't think that man ever really took a vacation, because even when he was on vacation, he'd give out his phone number and said, if you need anything, give me a call. If you got any questions, just call me. He did take vacations. He loved to be a photographer, and he loved to go to the British Isles, and he would spend a lot of time taking pictures of the landscape because he loved it there. And one of the things he told me that he wanted to do was maybe when he actually retired, maybe get some land and maybe build a little house over there. But unfortunately, he never really got the chance to do that. Bob was also busy in local politics. When he died, he was serving on the town of Hudson's budget committee. So public service was something that was in his veins. And what's interesting about Bob that most people didn't know, he was an exceptionally giving man. If you needed help, he was right there. The smallest thing, he was there to help you. He never asked for anything in return. He just wanted you to be okay. Whether it was sitting down and having a conversation with him, or him coming to visit you if something was wrong, he did that because he genuinely cared about people. And the man was as honest as the day is long. And he had no problem standing up to anybody if he felt he was right. And he would argue, my God, the arguments we would have about issues. And he helped to make me a better debater because he would never back down from an argument because he was always right. Bob leaves his wife Priscilla of 49 years, his daughter Jess, his son Jeff, Jess's husband Justin, and Jeff's wife Jackie, as well as 3 granddaughters. One, Kylie, was adopted. She's considered to be adopted by the family. And Lorelei, and his newest granddaughter, Elspeth. One of the last times I spoke to him, he talked a lot about all the wonderful things he planned to do with Elspeth. He wanted to show her the world, and that he was her Bob. That's what she called him, Bob. And you want to talk about a little girl having somebody wrapped around her finger? It was interesting to watch the two of them. He loved that little girl so much, and he had so many plans that things that he wanted to do. Bob was also I had to write everything down because there was just so much to remember. He served as the Justice of the Peace. And if you'd ever been over to his house, he had these absolutely beautiful gardens. And he would marry people in those gardens for no cost. He worked with a number of groups, volunteering his time and money to support them. And he supported veterans, a variety of veterans organizations around the state, local food pantries in Hudson, and he actually helped foster children afford driving lessons so they could get their driver's license. There was something that someone had written about him which I thought was really great, and I think it's a good way to remember Bob. And he quietly helped so many and he never really understood the positive impact he had on so many people, his community, and the state of New Hampshire. Thank you, Mr. President.
And on the same note, you know, I have Senator Clegg's memorial card, just so you know. It was his famous line of saying something, just so you know. The first time I met Bob was downstairs by where Senator Gray's office is now. And having met him, I looked at him in the eye and I said, you know, I'm not sure I trust you yet. And we became best friends at that point. And I think he really enjoyed that. He liked that. It was a challenge to him, but I feel like I've lost a big brother. I've watched him help people. One day he called me up and said, come on outside. And he was in his big truck. He says, I got something for you. Gives me this dilapidated box. Thanks. Yeah, go look at it. It's for you. Inside it, it's a Bible. Thanks, Bob. You know, he's very attentive. And I want to quote a couple of verses from the Bible. I think he'd appreciate this too, because one's from Solomon, and there's many reasons why that's significant. But there's a verse, Proverbs 27:2, it says, let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. In the New Testament, the Lord Jesus wrote, take heed how you do your alms, your good works before men. Take heed that you're not doing it in front of them to be seen of them. But when you do your alms, do it in secret. And your heavenly Father, which sees you in secret, will reward you openly. 1 John says, my little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. That's Bob Clegg. I watched him help a veteran who did 3 tours in Vietnam, who was living in perfect swill. He asked me to help clean his house, and not only did I clean his house, Bob was in there rolling up the carpets of fecal with me, ripping down the walls and repainting them so that when this gentleman came back, he'd have a beautiful house to live, asked for nothing in return. I've listened to testimonies of people that are in this room who he's helped, and he's never sounded a trumpet saying, hey, look at me. I thought, wow, and the stories can go on and on about the Bobisms. We saw this huge line of individuals that came to pay tribute, and there should be a book written about this man. I truly love this guy. He'd tick you off sometimes, really bad, because he was never wrong. But at the end of the day, you know somebody had your back. Somebody that was very, very frank with you. Behold, a man in whom there is no guile. I really appreciated to know this guy and the people that he knows and loves. And on the back of his card, you know, I think he was Irish. It says, when Irish eyes are smiling, surely like the morning spring, in the lull of the laughter you'll hear the angels sing. When Irish hearts are happy, all the world seems bright and gay. But when Irish eyes are smiling, surely they'll steal your heart away. And this man had done so. I thank God for the privilege of knowing that man. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Avard. Senator Susi for personal privilege. Senator Waters for personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise as well to remember a former colleague of ours, Frank Torr, who died at age 93 on August 3rd, 2023, and just a extraordinary senator, extraordinary man, and someone who did so much for Dover. And so I just want to say a few words about him. He was raised alongside three brothers on a family farm on Chestnut Hill Road, and it's there he developed a profound love for the land and its nurturing spirit. He graduated from Spalding High in '48, went to Nassau College, and then into the Air Force. 4 years of proud service to our country. And then after military service, he and his brother went into business, and they established the Pollyann Trailer Park, named after their wives. And if that's not an honor in a marriage to have a trailer park named after you, I don't know what is. And it's just a wonderful. It's still there in Dover, and still it's a wonderful place for its tenants. The Torr family, I think when they kicked over the first rock on Dover Point Road, there were the Torrs, and they've been in the community for generations, and what they have done for Dover and for the state. So many organizations and committees. He was on the Pease Development Authority, Skyhaven Airport Authority, New Hampshire Ballot Law Commission, Selective Service Board, Manufacturer Homes Association, just to name a few. And then, for the city of Dover and the state of New Hampshire, Stratford Regional Planning Commission, Dover Personal Advisory Board, Cocheco Waterfront Development Advisory Committee, Dover Utilities Commission, Counselor at Large and Dover City Council, 25 years in the Dover Planning Board. And you see a theme here of careful planning. And, it took 20 years, but the Cocheco Waterfront Project, which is going to transform our city, is breaking ground. And I think no better tribute to the vision he had for what the community could be. His 18 years up here in the House and the Senate. He was a budget guy. He was on budget, appropriations, physical committees of the House and Senate, and I think that he helped establish a real pattern of just how that kind of work should be done with the people's resources. Lots of recognitions and awards for his planning work, property rights, development, exemplary standards of professional conduct, courtesy, and respect. I wanted to go back to that kind of first thing about, growing up on that farm, what it meant to Frank. And in some ways, he was an environmentalist long before we started to use that term. New Hampshire Farm Bureau, New Hampshire Timber Owners Association. And I would most often see Frank, when I first ran, he just gave me just great advice about that. But then I most often see him over at the recycling center, and even just a few months ago. And he'd always have that kind of twinkle in his eyes, throwing some trash into the plastic bin or the cardboard or whatever. And I knew that he had some advice for me on an issue, and I really valued that so much. And not long before Frank passed, his wife Ann passed, and many people remember her service in the House. She was majority leader, and what a force of nature Ann was, just both up here and also in Dover. And I will say, the apples don't fall far from the tree. I had their son Tom as a sophomore, was in one of my classes at UNH, and he graduated, went to law school, and then returned right to the hometown. And Frank and Ann's other children too. Service. So I'm glad we're here today to commemorate Frank, along with Senator Clegg, and have the candle burning brightly for folks who shed so much light on this body. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Senator D'Alessandro for personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, unanimous consent. I had the privilege of serving with the Cleggmeister, who was taken good care of by Senator Carson and Senator Avard. And I had the honor of working with Frank Torr. And let me just say this. Frank Torr was a good human being. A good human being. Ian and he were the perfect couple. The perfect couple. The Jebster, I'm sure that you remember her from our service in the House all those many years ago. Ian was a power hitter. No question about that. She had a lot of juice, and she used it. Frank would walk around with that little book, and he'd be doing everything on finance. And he tutored Clegg on finance. He was really Clegg's mentor. And when Clegg became president of the Senate, the first thing he did was hired Frank to do the budget. And I happened to be on finance, and I worked with Frank on a daily basis. Used to call him in the evening and find out what was going on and so forth and so on. But, you know, in this business, when you can say a guy dedicated his life to public service, that's a very meaningful situation. And both he and his wife dedicated themselves to public service. I'd go to the hockey games at UNH, and there's Frank and his wife. He loved hockey. He loved the university. Must have loved you, Senator Waters. That was the linchpin that tied it all together. But he was the guy who gave it all. It gave it all to public service. And, you know, what better way can you remember people than for the good that they did and the spirit that they leave, that spirit of cooperation, of wanting to do the right thing. And let me end by saying there was one guy who was the epitome of this, and his name was Ray Burton. And I said, Ray Burton, God rest his soul, created the committee to do the right thing. Well, the Cleggmeister and Frank Torr were both honorary members of the committee to do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. Senator Gray for personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Certainly, I knew both of the individuals, and Mr. Torr, Senator Torr, I had the privilege of serving on the Stratford County Commission with him, the airport also. But the Torr name, if you are a member of Stratford County, you can't help but know the Torr name. And in fact, the history of Rochester, one of the ones that I read, the first thing that they talk about is the Torr Farm on Chestnut Hill Road. And I had the privilege of knowing both Ann and Pauline, who the trailer park, manufactured housing community is named after. I want to do that. And both of those individuals that we are honoring today are well worth it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Gray. Seeing no more personal privileges, I have one. We've had 3 of our members recently honored with some significant achievement awards. Senator Whitley and Senator Ricciardi both received Legislator of the Year award for some of their work on the budget. And last night, the conscience of the Senate, the lion of the Senate, Senator D, received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Business and Industry Association. So I would hope we would honor all 3 of our members. Okay, thank you. I am told there's still some hamburgers outside, so with no further ado, I'm going to recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the business of the day being completed, that the Senate recess for the purpose of sending and receiving messages. Upon completion, the Senate will stand adjourned to the call of the chair.
Thank you, Senator Carson. I would add that without objection, all personal privileges or unanimous consent or other remarks shall be entered into the permanent journal of the Senate per Rule 216 and 17. Senator Carson made the motion for recess. Are we ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. We are in recess to the call of the chair.